I think Bitcoin over time will continue to rise because Bitcoin has built-in deflation. Not only do you have the halving cycles and you have the reduction in the new payouts and the reduction of new Bitcoin hitting the market, but you also have Bitcoin getting lost. You have people who don't know what they're doing, who buy something, they lose their private keys, or a lot of Bitcoin has already been lost, I'm sure. That's deflationary. Those Bitcoin exist, but they're not in circulation. And so the amount of Bitcoin will shrink over time, which will drive up the value of that Bitcoin, all other things being equal.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I've got a special one for you guys on StockPulse. I've got nobody special, Jack. And Jack, I always love having you on, so welcome.
Thanks, Patrick. It's great to see you again.
So as we're leading up to the Silver Symposium, now for you guys, please don't forget, helps out a lot. Like, share, subscribe. And if you're not already following Jack and his channel, Nobody Special Finance, look at the description below. Definitely give it a thumbs up because we're talking about the Silver Symposium. And Jack, let's talk about last year. Do you remember? We're just reminiscing about that. I remember I came just because I wanted to meet Ninja and have a good time and learn a little bit about silver. Next thing I know, I'm sitting down next to you. Do you recall how I was like looking that day?
Yeah, you were a little nervous, a little bit of a deer in headlights, but you were so excited to be at the event, and it was great. You could sense it. The energy was radiating off of you, Patrick. It was funny, but it was also very cool.
I want to shift over and let's just talk some stuff because I am eager to discuss a few things that are happening now with you, especially as we're gearing up to the Silver Symposium. I got into Bitcoin because I thought it was a cool piece of technology and it happened to pencil out. It paid the bills. When I came out, it changed everything. I was red pilled, right? I now see things differently than I ever saw them before. And it wasn't because of my knowledge of Bitcoin. It was because of my experience with how Bitcoin as money works. And here, as I'm learning how things are working, I want to show our audience here, that's the goal of StockPulse, is how we measure things in Satoshi value. That the idea I spoke to you about right before we started was we want to measure things in Satoshis, right? So the idea is, how do we beat the system? Now, this isn't financial advice. This is just education. But the reality of what we're saying here is Bitcoin has never lost in a 4-year period. There is no harder asset than Bitcoin, and has never been outperformed in a 4-year period. So one of the things that you and I have talked about a lot is what's happening overseas. And I want to talk about the DXY today. And we just start there. I think oftentimes people miss out on what's really happening. And if I may, I might just even pull up a chart of the DXY today while we're talking and ask you, what do you see going on? Because when we see the dollar going up in value, it impacts many markets, right? When we see the dollar going down in value, it also impacts many markets. So what do you see happening here with the DXY?
So an important thing, a distinction to remember with the DXY or the Dixie, as we call it, is the DXY measures the dollar's strength against other currencies. It doesn't measure the dollar's strength against stuff. Right, we still have 3% inflation. If you go by the latest government statistics, 3.3% CPI. So the dollar is still losing value relative to stuff. But if you look at the DXY chart, the DXY has been heading higher for the last month or so. The DXY has been heading higher. The DXY had a monster bull run in 2022. That was the dollar getting stronger against everything else, or against all the other currencies, namely the euro, the yen, the Canadian loonie, the British pound. These are all go into this basket in this formula, and each currency has a different weighting. The euro has the biggest weighting, and then that's where you get the DXY. Noticeably absent from the DXY is the Chinese yuan. That's a whole other story.
Of course.
But the reason why the DXY is important is, all other things being equal, and that's a big asterisk, all other things being equal, if the DXY is going up, asset values, which includes stocks, which includes gold, are heading lower. If the DXY is heading lower, stocks, gold, and Bitcoin would be typically heading higher. Now, emphasis, all other things being equal, because all other things are not equal. We live in a world of chaos and entropy, and obviously one thing changes something else. So it doesn't always work out one for one. But the DXY is kind of like a buoyancy force or a weight. When the Dixie is heading lower, it's putting buoyancy forces upward on the price of assets. When the Dixie is heading higher, it's adding to the weight, pushing asset values lower.
Now, this is something that I find really interesting because as we discuss these types of topics, you would say, you're right, and you said it, if everything is as is, if nothing else had changed, this is what would happen. But now we start to see things changing that are not just impacting the Dixie, but impacting financial markets as we see it in totality, right? CBDCs, for example, having a huge opportunity, especially if it's backed with gold, valuing fiat in different terms, especially in relative nature to gold. So these are things that we talk about. It seems like everyone is trying to find a way to value something, but the one thing that people aren't really valuing things is in Satoshis, because it's the one asset class. Bitcoin is the one thing that you can never make more of. We know that indefinite supply is at 21 million. You're only going to have 21 million. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. That's it. You can only have 100 million Satoshis per Bitcoin. That's how it works. So when you start measuring assets like that, I want to start talking about different ways to beat it, because one of the things is I love my gold. I love my silver. And that's why we're here to talk about Bitcoin, gold, and silver. Silver being a predominant one, as we start seeing the use of the BRICS nations. Yeah, I mean, silver is huge, right? If you guys remember this last year, those of you who were there, this was the cool silver stamp that we got last year at the Silver Symposium. And this year, anyone who comes to the event will be getting a 1 ounce silver round as well. So these are the things we value: silver. We want to make sure that we have it. What's happening with the BRICS nations now that you're seeing as we lead up into August? What are you suspecting is happening now as you see the Japanese markets tightening and the yield controls changing a little bit, and the euro is changing the way that they're doing stimulus? And I heard you this morning on China as well with the way that they're looking at doing stimulus release. How is this going to impact the DXY?
So you touched on a lot of different topics there. The three of the big ones, right? BRICS, Japan, and China. I guess China you could lump in with BRICS. Let me just get out of the way. I am not in the BRICS de-dollarizing overnight panic camp. I do think BRICS has the goal of de-dollarizing. And the only analogy I would make to that would be like the teenage kid who says, I want to move out of my house. I don't need mom and dad. I can stand on my own 2 feet. I'm all grown up now. And it sounds great. And then you go to do it and it sucks. And when you run out of money, where do you go? You run back to mom and dad.
Mom and dad.
Right. And right now, the US dollar is the safety net. It's the safety that everybody runs to, along with gold and along with other assets. But when things get bad, when banks fail, when stock markets start to crash, when there's hyperinflation in, say, Argentina, where do people go? They run to dollars. All right. So dollar is the safety net. And everybody talks a big game about getting rid of the dollar. And I've done some of that on my own channel because I do believe we are abusing the exorbitant privilege of having the world reserve currency, we, the United States, and that when we print money, not only are we stealing, we, the US government, we're stealing from our citizens, but we're also stealing from everybody in the world who holds a dollar. And most dollars are outside of the United States. So our quantitative easing and our money printing is theft from the whole world. When you print a dollar, you steal value from the existing dollars. So that will come back to haunt us. That being said, there remains no alternative on a wholesale, widely accepted level. There is no other safe place for a government to park its reserves. You've got some governments are going to gold. Central banks are increasing their gold holdings all over the world. That's a slow transition. You've also got places like in El Salvador, where they've made Bitcoin legal tender, and the central bank there is holding Bitcoin. You've got in Argentina, where you just had a shocker in the election there. You've got a libertarian actually has a chance of winning. Imagine that, a libertarian winning an election. Say it ain't so. He wants to make the dollar the currency. He wants to get rid of the Argentine peso because it's garbage and because they've increased the supply of them by 13x over the last few years. But he also wants to make Bitcoin legal tender, and he wants their central bank. Well, he wants to get rid of their central bank, but he wants the country to hold Bitcoin also. Yeah. So you do have these other rivals to the dollar are popping up, but none of them have made a dent. And the US dollar has lost some reserve currency status at the turn of the century. It was, I believe just under 80% of global reserves were in US dollars. Now it's in the high 50s. But there has been no one beneficiary of that loss of reserve status from the dollar. It's been spread out across the euro, across the pound, across the yuan, and to a much lesser extent, Bitcoin. So for right now, the dollar is still king. And every time there is mayhem in markets, you see the DXY go higher. That's because people are running to dollars for safety, and that hasn't changed yet.
It's almost like a chicken or the egg situation because, well, you would say that I see the markets going higher. I would say that DXY is going lower, causing this, because really what we're saying is the value of the dollar is worth less. So it takes more of those dollars to buy the same amount of stock. I really think that when we take a step back and understand that anything that is trying to get you to a dollar is just another magic trick. The dollar, fiat, is garbage. That's the one thing we must all understand is if we continue passing on the legacy to our children that saving dollars is smart, then we are doing a disservice to our children. We must stop. We must back up and say, kids, this is actually what the dollar is. Why do we, I felt a little bit bad. Sorry, Amo. He gave my son $100 for his birthday. And my son looked at him. Oh, man, it was so funny. It might have well have been this Japanese paper because he was like,
you were proud, weren't you?
Go get silver or something. And I was like, son, I'm so sorry. Like, I've been teaching my kids maybe a little too strong that the dollar is garbage. Why are even nations trying to pretend that the dollar is worth anything right now? I myself, as an American, as a United States citizen, do not believe in the value of our own currency. I do not believe in our military's ability to protect the dollar, even through petroleum negotiations. I just don't see it anymore. Right now, we are in the information age. People have access to truth right away. X is going all over the world quickly. We see truth. So when you're telling me that you see the dollar games being played, but you see the truth in blockchain, you're going to tell me that something is going to stand in the way of that? It is absolute truth. So I don't believe that children these days will be seeing a nation where they will only know the dollar. Until last, 10 years, there's no child who's known a world without the dollar. Yep. Now it's different. This is the first time in history where a child grows up saying, I want to save in Bitcoin. And they could create lifelong wealth should they choose to do that, especially as you consider some of the things that are going to happen this next year. The Fed is going to increase the interest or decrease the interest rates. As you see the Fed decreasing interest rates, you're also seeing the Bitcoin halving coming in. And then, of course, my favorite thing that I want to talk about with you, which is, I know we've talked a lot, but I just really want to talk about this with you. Here it is. What do you think about Grayscale? Now, they have the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, but they want to make it into an ETF. Now, we heard the news. It's going to get pushed again. Why is it going to get pushed again? Because I believe Gary Gensler wants to delay the decision as long as possible. Again, right about the point where they start decreasing interest rates, the halving for Bitcoin comes, which decreases the supply of Bitcoin every day from 900 Bitcoin to 450 Bitcoin a day. And then thirdly, you're going to have these ETFs all being approved by BlackRock, by ARK. They don't want the Grayscale Trust to be converted because then it becomes a Bitcoin ability to sell. Right now, I kind of like the idea that they have to hold the Bitcoin and they can't sell it.
So I have mixed feelings. I'm all over the place at the thought of a Bitcoin ETF.
I know, right? I hear you.
First off, my initial reaction as a Bitcoin holder is, all that new demand for Bitcoin driving the price higher. Yes. All right. That's the bait. And if you bite, you're going to regret it. All right. Because I do think that ETF, it's going to give people who, let's be honest, they're lazy. They're lazy investors. They don't want to take the time to learn how Bitcoin works. It scares them, the private keys, the buying the hardware wallet. They'd much just rather log into their Robinhood account, which, can you believe there's still Robinhood customers out there? After everything they've done to their clients, there's still Robinhood customers.
No, or
they would much rather they'd much rather just log into their Robinhood account and buy some Bitcoin ETF. All right. You don't own Bitcoin when you do that. All right. When you buy Grayscale Trust, you do not buy Bitcoin. You buy an IOU, not even an IOU because it's a trust. There's no redemption protocol, but you're basically buying a promise from the company that runs that ETF. All right. Now, I don't trust anybody to hold my Bitcoin for me. I like cold storage. I like my own ownership. And although I'm excited at the prospect of all of those lazy Robinhood traders being able to buy into a Bitcoin ETF, bidding up the price of an asset with which I own, let's also talk about the individuals that are playing involved here. Let's talk about Gary Gensler, who is trying to block the Bitcoin ETF. Well, I am personally not a fan of Gary Gensler. I think he's a stooge for they with a capital T, they being the people who rule the world at our expense. And I'd like to know what Sam Bankman-Fried was talking about in all those closed-door meetings with Gary Gensler that there's no public record of. I'd like to see a Freedom of Information Act filing for all correspondence between those two. You'll never get it. But Gary Gensler is not on our side. All right. And if he does approve an ETF, it's probably not going to be good for you or I. As much as I'm excited by the prospects for the higher demand, I can't help but think if he approves it, it means a guy like Gary Gensler thinks it's a good idea, and he doesn't care if it's a good idea for us. He cares if it's a good idea for him.
That's what you saw with the 2 times leverage that was approved. Of course, they'll approve that. Yep. That makes sense.
Well, that's another thing. The 2x leverage, they've approved the futures. They've approved derivatives that, in my experience, derivatives are used to manipulating the price of the underlying commodity.
And that was just released on Coinbase today, guys. This is new breaking news. As of today, Coinbase is releasing this. So now you can have leverage on Bitcoin, which again leads to derivatives, which leads to huge wreckage.
Yep. And then the last thing I'm going to caution you, and this is where I think the precious metals guys and the Bitcoin guys need to set aside the differences. I know they love to argue the pet rock versus the air token. I hear it all the time. I get it from both sides on my channel because I like both assets. But anybody who followed the silver squeeze movement like I did, anybody who owns a couple of these, all right, you've seen what the SLV trust, what the ETFs and precious metals have done to the market for precious metals. They are not avenues that make it easier for investors. They don't democratize finance. They're tools that the big banks use to manipulate the prices of the underlying commodity, the metal, and to harvest arbitrage and to take money from us, from you, the retail trader. And I have no doubt in my mind that any Bitcoin ETF will be used to the same ends, that it will be used to manipulate retail traders and to siphon value away from their investments. It's done with SLV. It's done with GLD. And I think they'll do it with whatever Bitcoin ETF eventually gets approved. And that's why I have mixed feelings. Yeah, yay, my Bitcoin went up in value because there's this new ETF and the first thing they're going to do is buy a bunch. But, look at what's going on. I mean, these firms like BlackRock, they already control your retirement. They already control your pension. They already control your 401k. And they're using it to extort their beliefs onto the world, right? They're using your money to mandate ESG investment, which maybe you're in the camp where you like ESG and you're good with that, but maybe you're not. Either way, some other guy is using your money as firepower to force his views on the world. And I don't want that done to Bitcoin. And I think the people who are pushing ESG will do the same thing with Bitcoin.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of really great points. And the first one being, guys, I don't care if your favorite thing about this coin here is that there's a Bitcoin logo on it, or I don't care if your favorite thing is that it's silver. The reality is we have a lot more in common than you guys would like to believe. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, that we need to band together. I think that there is a bigger evil here. And Jack, the question is like, what? We do nothing? So what? We do nothing? No, we use what we understand about how they operate, and we understand about systems and structures we can put together, and we understand the value of assets like Bitcoin, and we understand the cyclical nature, so that if you are, for example, a real estate agent who understands the market cycle, understands how to make money on flipping a house, you can understand that, hey, right now I'm looking at the average price of a house, and the Satoshic value of a house is actually really low because my sats are worth so much. That means if I buy a home now, I can buy 6 of these homes, and when Bitcoin crashes, I don't even have to sell the home for a profit. I can actually sell it for a loss and fire sell them because I just need to buy my money back and put it into Bitcoin so I can do it all over again with the apartment down the street. When you start thinking in Bitcoin and start financing in Bitcoin and using the community to do the work together, there's no reason we need these third-party banking systems to make the profit off of each other's great ideas. We understand there's a solution. What are we going to do? Nothing? Is that really our solution? What would you teach your kids?
I use the phrase unbanking myself. Why I buy Bitcoin for the same reason I buy gold and silver. I don't buy one instead of the other. They don't even occupy the same space on the risk return spectrum, right? Bitcoin is obviously more speculative, more volatile. Gold is safety, all right? But they are both dollar alternatives, and they are both a way to divorce a portion of my wealth from the establishment financial system so that in a worst case scenario, my floor is raised, all right? So I heard this from Doomberg, the funny money chicken that I explained to my daughters because my daughters love chicken. So I let them see Doomberg interviews every now and then. He left a pretty good comment in one of his interviews when he said buying gold, buying precious metals, you're not going to get rich buying gold and precious metals, but it will prevent you from becoming dirt poor. Think of debanking some of your wealth and owning precious metals as improving your worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, the dollar goes to near zero, right? They hyperinflate it away. Well, you've still got some wealth, right? So you're not rich. You've still gotten poor because now all your dollars and your holdings and everything and the economy is crumbling all around you. You're still not rich, but you haven't lost everything because you've still got an ounce of gold, which in ancient Rome, an ounce of gold was enough to get you a pretty nice men's toga. And today, an ounce of gold is enough money to get you a pretty nice men's suit. Right. So if you bought gold in ancient Rome, you've got the same value today. But we don't use, what was it, the dinar? What was the currency in ancient Rome? I don't remember. But, the world reserve currency has changed however many times since Rome fell, and the values have gone up and down and up and down. But if you held gold, you've got the same preserved purchasing power. So owning physical precious metals improves your worst case scenario. It raises your floor. Now, Bitcoin, I have a little different idea. Like you, I think Bitcoin over time will continue to rise because Bitcoin has built-in deflation. Not only do you have the halving cycles and you have the reduction in the new payouts and the reduction of new Bitcoin hitting the market, but you also have Bitcoin getting lost. You have people who don't know what they're doing, who buy something, they lose their private keys, or a lot of Bitcoin has already been lost, I'm sure. That's deflationary. Those Bitcoin exist, but they're not in circulation. And so the amount of Bitcoin will shrink over time, which will drive up the value of that Bitcoin, all other things being equal. So I buy Bitcoin for the same reason, to unbank myself and to de-dollarize, but I buy Bitcoin for the upside, whereas I buy gold and silver to prevent the downside. They're different locations on the risk return spectrum, but they are there for the same reason. I don't trust they.
I like to call gold and silver my insurance policy. That's what I have in case if stuff hits the fan. That's my insurance policy. I make sure that I have that. I have some for every one of my family members. But the reality is when my son comes up to me, and this is where it really hits me, where I have to kind of step back and ask myself, what am I doing here? And I'll share this with you. My son actually saw me talking about this article, and we were just talking a little bit about what are the impacts of some of this stuff. This is a guy I follow on Twitter, and he was talking about 11,000 Bitcoin have been withdrawn from exchange wallets in the last 24 hours. Now, this was 2 days ago. But what we see happening here is over time, whether it's due to lost Bitcoin, whether it's that Bitcoin is not being moved and we got whales buying, whether it's newbies are coming in and they're starting to stack, more wallets are growing in the ecosystem. More wallets than ever have more than 0.1 Bitcoin. More wallets than ever have now more than 1 Bitcoin in them. More wallets than ever have not moved Bitcoin in over a year. We're talking right now, as of yesterday, we've crossed the threshold of 75% of Bitcoin has not moved in the last year. What we're saying here is 75% of that Bitcoin is out of play. And that's not accounting for the Bitcoin that has been mined by the miners in the last year, people have been accumulating in the last year. So it really comes down to the idea of how scarce is Bitcoin. I think people, that saying about don't make an assumptions that makes an ass out of you and me. You're not making an ass out of me, because I'm telling you, I've been calling this, I've been warning you guys. It is coming. Be cautious. There is not enough Bitcoin to go around. Don't assume that you'll be able to buy Bitcoin later. They have been trying to stop you from buying it for a while. You just haven't seen it.
Yeah. Now, let me just throw one little caveat into that whole thing. And again, I'm long Bitcoin over the long term, but we're in a unique situation right now, and it's something Bitcoin has never seen. The money supply is shrinking. All right, the M2 money supply in the United States has been falling since about last April timeframe. Right, the last month or two, it's ticked up a little bit, but the trend is down. The last time the money supply shrank, 1929 or 1930, the Great Depression. All right, so we are right now. Inflation is still there. We have disinflation right now, and the inflation rate is slowing. All other things being equal, there's that asterisk again. We will see deflation soon because the money supply is already shrinking. And I think the deflation will hit in the same way the inflation hits. First, the money supply expands. Then asset prices go up. Then consumer prices go up. And then wages go up. We're in the final stages of inflation right now. The Fed is trying to prevent those wages from going up, that last phase in the inflation cycle, by raising interest rates and by doing quantitative tightening. They don't want the plebs to get a raise. They want that gap between productivity and compensation to grow even more, like it has in that first chart on WTF happened in 1971. So we are approaching deflation right now. It's coming pretty fast. Now, we may see upticks like we just saw. We went from 3% CPI to 3.3, but with the money supply falling and with debt defaulting, like we're seeing in China, like we're seeing with the yellow bankruptcy, like we're seeing in bankruptcies for companies right now, we've already had more large bankruptcies in the first 6 months of this year than we had all last year combined. And as people are paying down mortgages, right? There's no new mortgages being taken out. The housing market is frozen. So debt is slowly being repaid in the housing market. That's deflationary. Bitcoin has never seen deflation. In all of its existence, the money supply has only ever grown.
Bitcoin was created because of this exact situation.
Yes.
In 2008, once the GFC happened, that's why Bitcoin was created. Now, on a positive side, a shrinking money supply could lead to higher prices, right? Because Bitcoin's a limited asset. But a shrinking money supply can make Bitcoin attractive also as a store of value. But there could also be negative effects on Bitcoin because it could lead to a decrease in liquidity with fewer Bitcoin to trade, and that might make it harder for investors to get in. Just
remember, the first thing to go up in an inflation cycle is asset prices, and I expect deflation would hit in the same way. The first thing to go down in deflation would be asset prices.
I mean,
right? And Bitcoin is an asset right now. It's a lot of people want it to be called a currency, but in practice and execution, the way most people use it, it's an asset class at this moment. So
I agree with you.
I don't know. The halving is still months away, right? What is it, April? I think the halving is.
We've got a while, like 220 days left till the halving.
So I don't know if the Fed is still going to be tightening, if interest rates will still be high. My gut tells me by April, something awful will have happened. And this whole discussion may be moot because by April, we may be back into QE and zero interest rate, as I call it, ZIRP and BRR, zero interest rate policy and Fed go BRR. All right. ZIRP and BRR may very well be back by April, in which case it's going to be rinse repeat for the halving cycle, money supply blowing up right as Bitcoin gets more scarce and the price goes vertical.
I don't think there's anything they can do to stop the parabolic effects of a 4-year cycle. It's just the basic economic cycle, supply and demand. More people want it, less Bitcoin there. It's the 4-year cycle, guys. Mark my words, by Christmas of 2025, we're going to be sitting very happy and you're going to be hearing me say, Satoshi Value says it's time to buy some silver.
The one caveat, if we are in a massively deflationary death spiral at the time of the halving, those assumptions, the previous examples of the 4-year cycle, right, did not have that variable in play, because in that environment, the dollar's value goes vertical relative to stuff, right? In that environment, things get cheaper, prices are going down. In that environment, gold and silver do very poorly, right? Because the dollars become scarce when debt defaults. Now, if that's the opposite, I mean, we've never lived in an environment where dollars became scarce before. It's never happened in any of our lifetimes. Very few people are even alive the last time it happened. All right. I still think Bitcoin is heading higher, but that is worth keeping an eye on. If we are in a deflationary cycle, which it may happen and be over by the time the halving gets here, It's not changing my approach. I'm on an automated, I buy a little bit every week of Bitcoin and I put it into cold storage. But it's something I'm keeping an eye on. Deflation, Bitcoin won't like it. Gold won't like it. I think the answer to the deflation is going to be more inflation. The Fed is going to Zerpenberg. And when that happens, you'll be glad you own Bitcoin. Just be aware that that's out there. Shrinking money supply could be a problem for Bitcoin.
Okay, so that's fair. But if we're in an deflationary environment during a Bitcoin halving, wouldn't it be possible that the price of Bitcoin would increase significantly? Because deflationary environments tend to favor assets with limited supply, like gold.
Yes, but we're talking about Bitcoin as measured in US dollars, right? So now you've got deflationary forces on both sides of the equation. Which will be greater, the deflation in the Bitcoin supply or the deflation in the money supply?
Either way, it doesn't matter because the purchasing power of Bitcoin is all that I care about. It's my ability to buy more of the same assets later on. If I want a house, if I want a car, it may cost me 6 or 7 times the dollar amount, but it costs me less Bitcoin than ever. So I guess that's the whole point of why I wanted to create StockPulse. It's because I don't measure things in dollars. I do not measure the value of silver in dollars. I measure the value of silver as 90,000 Satoshis. I know that that's what it costs me today. If I wanted to buy an ounce of silver or a half ounce, it's going to cost me roughly 40,000 Satoshis. What about the value of a dollar? I don't know. It'll probably go up in dollar value. But next year, it'll probably cost me 30,000 Satoshis or 20,000. So speculatively, I don't care because whether it's an inflationary environment or a deflationary environment, I make the case that Bitcoin is the hardest asset ever created and nothing will outperform Bitcoin in a 4-year cycle.
And my horizon is also much longer than 4 years. Regardless of what happens around this halving and, this Fed tightening cycle, and do we see deflation or don't we? I don't plan on selling or trading any of my Bitcoin or my sats before 2030. I promised myself I was not going to unload any of my Bitcoin until I've been through at least the next 2 halving cycles. And undoubtedly, by the end of the second from now halving cycle, Bitcoin will be several X higher than it is right now. All right. Is it going to be 10 or is it going to be 100? I don't know, but it will undoubtedly be much higher because I know what the Fed is going to do. I don't know how much pain they're going to inflict on us first, but we know Zerpenberg is coming back eventually. It is the key to their power, and people like that don't give up their power willingly.
And I'm going to end with this one, Jack. You sent me a message this morning, and we were chatting about some stuff happening in Singapore. I'm not ready to get into that story yet because I need to do some more research, but I'm hoping that you will be breaking that news first because I would love to have more context from you about what's happening in those markets and what's happening globally there too, before I even try to touch it. So I hope you guys are watching Jack's channel. Make sure to like, share, subscribe. Don't forget StockPulse Silver Symposium coming up in Vegas, September 29th. And I look forward to seeing as many of you guys there as possible. Thanks again for coming on, bro.
Anytime. Thanks for having me on, Patrick.